Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for listening. Scary Shorties wouldn't exist without you, the fans. Please like and follow us on Apple, Spotify, or wherever you listen, and share the show with your friends to help us grow. Thanks, guys. Late Show at the Starlight Drive-In. Written by S. Pony Hill. Read by Drew Grimm. Even at 2 a.m., the traffic isn't completely dead out here on Highway 66. It's a major north-south artery, and Lee Ray was getting annoyed at the length of time he was being forced to wait, until he could see no headlights coming from either direction. His date for the night, reclining in the passenger seat, legs crossed at the knee, foot bobbing to the rock music pouring out of the speakers mounted on the door panels. Luann Swearington freshly turned 18, a berry ripe for the picking, Lee Ray approximated. If only he could get this damn show on the road. She's already yawned twice since he parked here, just outside the chained and locked-in iron crossbar that prevented access to the Starlight Drive-In. He'd already shown her a good time, a meal at Pizza Hut, a few hours making endless loops around the indoor skating rink in Crowley while that dumb pop music he hated played much too loudly. It was the after party that he was looking forward to. Luann already had a reputation as a girl easily talked into the back seat, and Lee Ray wanted to find out for himself. Lee Ray wasn't desperate for that sort of thing. No, sir. He was an above-average handsome man with bright blue eyes, a natural charming smile, and a shock of thick honey brown hair. Acne, the scourge of all teenagers, had spared his face, and he was the only guy he knew in the Tri-County area under the age of 21 that was sporting a tattoo. He had to drive 3 hours over into Georgia to get the ink, though. Yes, sir. Lee Ray had no shortage of young ladies wanting to ride around in his fire-engine red 1987 Chevrolet Camaro Z28. But Luann, well, he'd had his eye on her for a long time. Maybe it was the allure of forbidden fruit, or maybe it was just he wanted what Willie Mack had, they being old high school rivals and all. Both guys were on the baseball team, and somehow Willie had stayed a few points ahead of Lee Ray's baseball batting average their entire senior year, and that really pissed off Lee Ray something fierce. But when he heard Willie Mack had signed up for the Marines and left Luann with no arm to hang on, Lee Ray saw his opportunity. It took some doing, don't be mistaken. Lee Ray had to let distance do what distance does, and that was make Luann question if she was wasting the best days of her youth waiting around for some scamp to come home. And when he called to tell her he'd been deploying straight to Iraq right after boot camp, well, that was the last straw, and Lee Ray was waiting right there to pounce. So here they were, sitting in Lee Ray's Camaro, waiting for the coast to be clear, so they could both break into the Starlight Drive-In and slip inside to somewhere, let's say, somewhere more private. The old rusty changeable sign for the drive-in out here somehow still shined, though at least half of its eternal fluorescent bulbs were out. Lee Ray would often see the sign at night driving south into Swansville, or even later at night driving back north towards home. He never could figure out why that one sign had stayed hooked to power. The property had been shut off years ago. Maybe it was tapped directly into the county system. And who had put those 6 black plastic letters up there on the sign? Repent? Appropriate for a church, maybe, but a drive-in? Didn't make a lick of sense to Lee Ray. Finally, no headlights in either direction. Lee Ray popped open the driver's door and hurried to the trunk. He put a set of bolt cutters back there for just this occasion, and he hoped it would make short work of either the chain or the padlock, whichever would free the iron crossbar. A few snips from the sharp jaws of the bolt cutter, and the chain rattled down onto the paved driveway. The squeaking of the rotation of the crossbar, as Lee Ray pushed it back and made room for his car to pass, was like a sweet mating call to his ears. Lee Ray jogged back to the Camaro, tossed the bolt cutters inside and closed the trunk, then slid back behind the driver's seat. A flick of the ignition key and the powerful Chevy motor rumbled to life. The choice of the Starlight drive-in wasn't a last-minute decision, not by a long shot. Lee Ray had passed the place 100 times, knew the reason it sat here abandoned, and chose the spot specifically for a night such as this. It's a technique old as time, scaring the panties off your date. Lee Ray could imagine a Roman taking his date to a late-night fight at the Coliseum, or how his dad would often tell him the story of taking Lee Ray's mom to see the Wolfman when they were first dating. Fear. It heightened the senses, raised the heart rate, and made the weaker sex appreciate a strong protector. And the Starlight Drive-In had a scary story that would scare the clothes off of anybody. The tires of Lee Ray's Camaro ground over the cracked asphalt parking spots inside the drive-in. The parking lot, where over 100 cars would have parked to view a flick back in the Starlight's heyday, had been compromised by wind, water, and sun, and now a spiderweb of cracks splintered across the hard black surface. Waist-high poles were planted in a neat row every 12 feet, and some were still topped with miniature speakers. Lee Ray picked a parking spot with a speaker still upright, near the center of the park, and shifted his car. Lee Ray eased the key in the ignition back a notch into the ACC setting so that the stereo mounted in the dash would remain powered. He had paid a pretty penny for the newest Panasonic stereo with eternal equalization and bass boost, and he wanted a quality audio soundtrack to what he hoped would be a session of sweaty lovemaking. He reached down under the console where he had mounted the aftermarket cassette tape storage compartment and pulled out a mixtape he had put together for such just an occasion. Lee Ray was more into that hard, heavy metal stuff, Metallica, Black Sabbath. But the ladies, they preferred that wussy hair metal shit. So who was Lee Ray to deny them what they wanted? This mixtape had it all. Right Here Waiting by Richard Marx, Heaven by Warrant, I'll Be There For You by Bon Jovi, and even Love Bites by Def Leppard. You know, the classic panty droppers. Now, just to turn up the heat with a scary story, and the Boom Chicka Bow Wow buffet would be open for dining. You ever been here before? Lee Ray asked before he already knew the answer. No way, Luann responded, looking out through the tinted passenger window to see what she could make out in the moonlight. This place is shady as hell. I feel like I could get tetanus just from looking at it. Yeah. You know why the place closed? Luann blew a small bubble with her chewing gum and popped it between her lips. She knew why they were there, why he was going to tell her the story. But if he was willing to put in the effort, she'd pretend she didn't know. Didn't the owners die or something? They were murdered, right here at the drive-in. Really? Luann gave a fake gasp. If he wanted her to play the scared little girl, then she was willing to play along. I think it was 1979. There was this serial killer that had been traveling cross-country right here on Highway 66. Earlier in the day, he'd killed a girl over in Atlanta, so he was just trying to put some miles between him and where he dumped her body. He saw this drive-in here, all lit up on a Saturday night, and figured it was a good place to lay low for a few hours. Oh my God, a serial killer? Luann asked, intentionally breathless. She had forgotten how much she enjoyed this little game, stringing a boy along and then finally shutting him down when he thought he was moving towards third base. Yeah, so he sat here in this very parking spot, waiting for the movie to be over and all the other cars to clear out. And while he waited, he took out a flour sack, ripped some eye holes in it, and made himself a mask. Luann faked a shudder. It made Lee Ray smile. His plan was working according to design. A mask? Luann again timed the goal perfectly. Yeah, and when all the cars had left, he popped the trunk, pulled out one of those old-timey bumper jacks. You ever seen one of those? They have this hook part that hooks into a hole in the bumper. Luann nodded along, trying to open her eyes as wide as possible and feigned growing worry. Anyways, the killer slung that bumper jack over his shoulder and headed straight over there. Lee Ray pointed back over the back seat, through the hatchback window of the Camaro, toward the partially collapsed cinder block building that used to serve as the concession stand and projection booth. That's where he found the husband and wife. She was cleaning, and he was in the office counting the night's ticket money. Oh my goodness, Luann whispered and covered her mouth with her hand, a bit out of practice with this acting thing, but it was all coming back to her. He went after the wife first. Wham, 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 with the bumper jack. Lee Ray smacked his fist hard into the dash of the Camaro for extra effect. Then he headed for the office. Luann kept her hand over her mouth, tried to concentrate on breathing through her nose in short bursts. It's the little things that sell the performance. But the husband, he must have heard the sound of the killer caving in his wife's skull, 'cause he came out of the office with a .38 revolver. Lee Ray paused a beat for full effect. Bang! Luann jumped a little and let out a squeal. The killer took a bullet square to the chest. Lee Ray let this statement sink in, thinking Luann would assume the story had ended. But it didn't kill him. Not right on the spot, 'cause that killer just kept on coming. Whack, whack, whack! The fist on the dashboard again. The husband goes down. Skull caved in from the bumper jack. Lee Ray leaned back a little in the seat, reached his arm back and leaned it over the top of the headrest of the passenger seat. Step 1 of Operation Make-A-Move complete. So the killer got away? There it is, that little gulp in between words. The fullness of the part is finally coming back to the actress. Lee Ray smirked. This chick is so scared, easy pickings. Nah, somebody was driving by just before sunrise on their way to work or something. Saw the screen still lit up by the projector, so they called the cops. The killer was laying there in the office, flour sack mask over his head, a wad of blood money in his fist, dead as a doornail. Luann let out a sigh and set her open hand on her chest, an expression of, please let my heart slow down. That is a terrible story, Lee Ray. Lee Ray let his hand fall from the passenger headrest to slide down just behind Luann's shoulders. Oh, that story ain't over yet. It's not? But the killer died, right? Well, that's what they said, Lee Ray said, letting his voice drop an octave, leaning in just a fraction. But what they can't explain is why every now and then people drive by and say they seen the movie screen all lit up. Lit up? Luann kicked up the scaredy-cat ploy just a notch. She knew Lee Ray was about to make his move, and she wanted the axe to fall swift and hard. Yeah, Lee Ray closed his eyelids a fraction, leaning over just a little bit more. All lit up, like a movie's playing. Before Luann could stiff-arm him in the chest, pretend to be offended, and tongue-lash him with a, what kind of girl do you think I am? Lee Ray's Camaro did the work for her. The engine stuttered and died. The hair metal band cut off as the stereo shut down. No sound. Nothing but moonlight filtered in through the tinted car windows. It felt eerily creepy now. What the hell? Lee Ray snatched at the keys, twisted the key in the ignition. Nothing. Tried again. Nothing. Did the battery die? Luann asked. This time there was a genuine concern in her voice. Lee Ray was a nice enough guy, but she didn't want to get stuck out here in the middle of nowhere with him. Plus, she couldn't put it past him that this was also part of his trick. Before Lee Ray could answer, a strange sound broke the silence. Static. What the hell is that? Lee Ray asked nobody in particular, looking around for the source of the sound, but the car's windows were fairly fogged by then. The speaker? Luann offered, her voice cracking for real this time, and pointed to the speaker mounted on the pole a few inches from Lee Ray's window. It's coming from the speaker. Without even considering the hazard of doing such a thing, Lee Ray rolled down the driver's side window. Not the whole way. Even Lee Ray ain't that stupid. Only about a quarter of the way down. The dented, rusted speaker hissed with static. Lee Ray was stunned and in non-action. What the hell is going on? Is somebody trying to pull a prank? Is somebody fucking with us? He twisted in his seat, head on a swivel, trying to see if he could pick out any movement. Nothing. Everything was just as dark and still as when they had cut the lock and pulled in his Camaro. Suddenly, the entire car was bathed in white light. Lee Ray had picked the wrong time to be turned in his seat. While he was looking out through the hatchback glass, a blinding white light hit him full in the face, killing any night vision he had just a few seconds ago. Jesus Christ, Lee Ray exclaimed and shielded his eyes with his hands. What the hell is that, Lee Ray? Luann asked, real panic creeping into her voice now. Somebody was up to no good, and she didn't like it. Somebody's messing with us, Lee Ray offered the only logical conclusion he could come up with. Then Luann, not quite as blinded as Lee Ray, saw it. The image being projected on the drive-in movie screen. It was terrifying. In grainy black and white, a figure, face obscured by a crude flour sack mask, was walking slowly directly toward the camera, winding its way through the evenly spaced pine trees. In its hands it held a metal bumper jack, the end coated in something dark. It looked like, well, Luann didn't need color film to know the dark stuff was blood. Okay. Screw this! Luann promptly threw open the passenger door and dashed from the car. Her flat-bottomed sandals made loud slapping sounds as she made haste across the parking lot, dashing in a straight line toward where Lee Ray had pushed open the crossbar at the entrance. Hey, wait! Lee Ray yelled after her, but she quickly disappeared into the darkness. The sight of her curvy body in full flight mode lit a fire in Lee Ray's chest. Great. All that planning for nothing. Tonight of all nights, somebody decided to play games. Well, these assholes were gonna pay. Lee Ray threw open the driver's door in a rage, reached over and pulled the trunk release lever at the same time he stuck out his foot to stop the car door from springing back closed. You picked the wrong goddamn night for this shit, he yelled back toward the source of the blinding white light. He felt around in the trunk for the bolt cutters. He didn't intend to hit anybody with them, but he'd sure smash up some stuff around them close enough to scare the hell out of them. Lee Ray covered his eyes and looked toward the source of the flickering white light. Yep, just as he'd thought. The light was coming from the projection building. Lee Ray pointed the set of bolt cutters at the light. I'm gonna hand you your ass, buddy. Anger and pure rage made Lee Ray's knees stiff, and his entire body shook as he moved toward the ruin of the projection booth. Behind him, on the illuminated drive-in screen, the masked figure continued on its measured, methodical march between the rows of trees. Lee Ray reached what used to be the plate glass double doors that led to the concession stand. The aluminum door frames now only held fragments of glass. Lee Ray didn't slow a fraction, kicking the door frames out of his path. Fragments of broken glass sprayed across the interior of the old concession area. Lee Ray paused. No movement in here, just a faint whirling sound coming from the next room over, the projection room. Lee Ray's anger was white hot, and he needed somewhere or something or someone to vent it on. He kicked his way through the loose trash accumulated on the bare concrete floor and stomped toward the projection room. If there used to be an actual door here, it was long gone. Just two rusted hinges barely hanging onto a wooden frame now. Lee Ray lifted the bolt cutters up high over his head and leaped through the doorway with a righteous growl of anger. There was no one there. At least, no one human. Just a shape in the center of the room, a silhouette with glaring light streaming from it, through a square hole in the wall and out toward the drive-in screen. He thought at first glance that it was some kind of growth, a mutated mass of pale white fungi spawned by a leaking water pipe, or rain streaming down from a crack in the half-collapsed roof. But this growth has a far too human-like shape. Two long, overly thin arms extended from its shoulders, braced against the open square in the wall facing the movie screen. Its chest, if it indeed was a chest, appeared to expand and contract, as if it was somehow breathing. It reminded Lee Ray of some kind of freaky plaster monster he'd seen in one of his monster magazines. Tucked in the back of its head was jammed an antique reel-to-reel movie projector, slowly spinning, humming and whirling. There were no eyes to speak of, no nose either, or ears, or any other facial features to suggest a living creature, other than a huge gaping mouth from which it emitted a blinding white light aimed at the distant drive-in screen. The film, if that's what you wanted to call the maddening black and white grainy moving picture, was somehow playing through this thing. Lee Ray paused. Then he chuckled out loud. Nice one, guys. Freaky looking as hell for sure, but surely nothing more than the stone creation of some Iron Maiden-inspired punk kids with way too much time on their hands while skipping school. It was a comforting thought, right up until the moment the thing moved. With audible cracks, distinct even above the maddening clamor of the old projector, the head turned toward where Lee Ray stood, suddenly feeling very stupid with the bolt cutters raised in attack formation. Long fingers began ripping strips of drywall coating with them, pulling loose from their grip on the wall at the edge of the hole. The projector thing slowly twisted at the hips. The blinding cone of light from its mouth swept across the projection room, until Lee Ray was struck fully in its halo. Somehow all logic and reasoning had escaped him. He should have spun on his heel and fled, screaming at the top of his lungs following Luann's trail out of the drive-in. But the light, the flickering, the whirling, the humming, it was mesmerizing. The bolt cutters fell from his hands, but he never heard their clatter to the floor. Lee Ray's ears were filled with an awful ringing, drowning out anything and everything. His two hands dropped to shield his eyes, but the light, that awful light, passed straight through flesh and bone, and it drew closer and larger. The perfectly circular mouth expanded, impossibly large. He was bathed in the white light, losing himself in it. He could no longer see his hands or any other part of his body. The light had taken all. The round mouth hole hovered directly over Lee Ray now, slowly descending, wrapping itself around him. Now everything was the light, and the light was everything. Lee Ray drew in a sharp breath. He blinked his eyes rapidly. Somehow, impossibly, he was lying on his back, staring upward at a row of swaying pine trees. The limbs, the pine needles, were not shades of brown and green like he remembered, just various shades of gray. Had the intense light of the projector rendered him colorblind? Lee Ray sat up. Why had he been lying down? Had he passed out? What had happened? Where the heck was he? The dank, dirty walls of the projection room had been replaced by a forest of black and white pines, all strangely planted in neat rows, each tree evenly spaced out from the next, the forest floor a carpet of gray pine needles. And what was that sound? a low, thumping bass beat intermixed with short hisses of static and electrical pops. As quickly as the sound registered in Lee Ray's ears, it suddenly stopped. Lee Ray twisted around, trying to get a bearing on his surroundings. Gray pine trees as far as the eye could see. But there, not 20 feet away, and one row of trees over, was a dark figure. It was a man wearing a gray flour sack mask draped over his head, with pale eyes staring at him through crudely torn eye holes, and in his hands, a heavy steel bumper jack covered in black blood and gore. Lee Ray let out a primal scream. It did not echo through the endless forest. It sprang from his throat monotone, as if broadcast from a dry-rotted speaker, as flat and one-dimensional as he had now become.